so we can post it to our website. And we're going to go ahead and get started. Today we are with Kellie Bass. Kellie, welcome. It's good to see you.
Thank you for having me.
And I am getting ready to learn a whole lot myself, so I'm excited about this. So we'll start with letting you introduce yourself, what you do at Oasis. You said you wanted to share some stuff about programs and prevention with us. We're going to talk about active bystander intervention. We're going to talk some about how y'all see trauma and how you help people build resilience and how you stay well. So we've got an information-packed session. So we'll get started and I'll ask you to introduce yourself.
Okay, so my name is Kellie Bass. I do use she, her pronouns for anybody who may need that information. I work for Oasis and my title is the Rape Prevention Education Coordinator, which in a nutshell just kind of means that I am responsible for doing primary prevention with our 7th grade students in the Watauga County school system. We have a 7-session program, which usually turns out to be 7 weeks, where we talk with those students about consent, boundaries, healthy relationships, active bystander intervention. Honestly, a lot of the things that I'm going to kind of touch on with you guys today. But yeah, that's what was I supposed to say? Anything else with my introduction?
That's good. Thank you. So y'all do a lot of things there, and I don't even think I really realized that y'all had the active bystander intervention program. So you want to just tell us generally some of the things that you want us to know about Oasis?
So, of course, Oasis, a lot of times in the community is known as the women's shelter. And, of course, we do have our shelter, but we do house all types of people in our shelter, regardless of gender, orientation, anything along those lines. So, of course, we have our shelter in an undisclosed location. We have our medical advocacy that we do if somebody needs a sexual assault kit done and they need somebody to be there with them for support. We're able to be there for them. Same thing with the justice system. If anybody needs a protection order or if they need help talking to police, detectives, anything along those lines, we can kind of be there. Obviously not as legal representation, but just as somebody as a support to be there that kind of knows the system a little bit and just kind of be there to support them. Of course, we have other, housing options for our clients. Yeah, I don't know why I'm nervous.
Take a breath. Let's all together. So Kellie's not doing it by herself. Let's all take a breath. I can always use a breath. We'll do in for 4 and out for longer exhale, because that's what slows our physiological processes down. So let's all do it together in solidarity with Kellie.
Thank you.
We'll go in for 4. Now for 8. Now, does that feel a little bit better?
Better. And I put my fan on me. I'm cooling down.
I've got mine on too. This mask, I was running about 110 today, so I can completely relate. Yes. So we're settled down. You are with friends, and I will do whatever I can to help you with it.
Good, thank you. Let me see your computer.
Okay, so we talked some about housing and shelter and legal services. There was something I was going to ask you about. The crisis line.
Oh, yes, of course. We have our crisis line that's available 24 hours. If you called at 2:00 in the morning on Christmas Day, you will talk to a real life human being. It's never an automated system, but you could call us at any point in time, and we're available. And if we don't have the resources to help you, we will connect you to somebody that does.
Great, thank you. I think those are the main ones that I know about as well. So let's talk a little bit. You've got a presentation, I think, for the active bystander intervention thing. So before we go to that, obviously, when we're talking about how you see people from trauma, you're talking about domestic violence, sexual assault, those types of situations. And like you said, 2:00 in the morning on Christmas Day, they can show up at your office. they can call into the crisis line. So, and my guess, and you may not know this, I don't think anybody in the county but Daymark does trauma intakes at screenings. Do y'all do a trauma intake or trauma screening at intake?
I see some Oasis people on the call. If you guys want to answer that. I don't work with clients directly. So that is not a piece of information that I would readily have access to.
Yeah. But my guess is kind of like the hospitality house. I'm assuming that everybody that knocks on your door is encouraged.
Sure, of course. Yes, of course.
And
We do have a screening tool that we use whenever we're talking to clients to see if they're eligible for our services, whether that's shelter or just general case management crisis work.
Yeah, and then histories and background of trauma, I also assume would probably be pretty high.
Mhm.
And so let's start talking then about active bystander intervention. You've got something that you wanted to present, so we'll see if that'll pull up on the screen.
It's easier for me to chat with you guys if you can see what I'm looking at. And of course, this is our entire presentation for just kind of basic Oasis information. So here, I'll just kind of put this in presentation mode and we'll get started.
Kelly, I'll watch the chat for you, so don't worry about that. If we have questions that come up in the chat, I'll read them to you so you don't have to try to pay attention to that.
Wonderful. Thank you. So for anybody who's popping in, again, my name is Kelly. I use she, her pronouns. I work for Oasis. And we're just going to chat about the active bystander intervention and some red flags today. And of course, I just want to mention that this is sensitive material. If you guys are joining us for this lunch and learn, unfortunately, statistically, with as many people in the chat room that we have now, there are multiple people probably in this room that have experienced intimate partner violence, sexual violence, even human trafficking. So if you guys feel the need to leave the room or even just kind of take a breather, step out for a little bit, I will not be offended. I just want you guys to take care of yourself. But so whenever I'm talking about intimate partner violence, that is a pattern of coercive behavior, right? Where somebody is using power and control to try and gain power and control over another person. And that could be through the use of physical, sexual, psychological, or verbal abuse. So just kind of laying that definition out there for you guys so we're all on the same page. And this is really, this presentation is kind of going to touch on a little bit of all of our prevention programming. So you guys will kind of really get to see what I'm working with and what I'm working on in the school system with even students at Hardin Park. Actually, we just finished up a session a couple minutes before I popped on here. But so whenever we're talking to these students about what a healthy relationship is, we're going to talk about mutual trust and respect is kind of at the core and foundation of what we're talking about with these students. We want those relationships to be safe and supportive, equal, accepting, honest, of course, respect and setting boundaries, honest and truthful communication. We're going to let them know that it's okay to spend time together and apart from their partners, from their dating partners, even their friends, if they're not at a dating point in their life yet, because they are usually in 7th or 8th grade. Then we kind of move forward to unhealthy relationships. Those are going to include passive aggressive behaviors, hurtful jokes, feeling like you have to ask for permission from your dating partner or friend. If that person isn't respecting your boundaries, if they're cheating or lying, feelings of loneliness when you're together obviously might be a little red flag. Dismissing someone's feelings or experiences could be considered unhealthy. And if there are more bad times than good times, that might not be a healthy relationship. And obviously embarrassing their partner in public. And then it kind of moves forward. So I'm working on a spectrum here. And you can even see on these poster boards behind me today last week, the students were working on good, bad, and abusive relationship characteristics. So we've talked about good, bad, and now it's moving forward to abusive, which would be including no privacy, obviously emotional abuse or put downs. That includes threats of or actual physical violence, pressure to be physical in ways that you're not ready to be physical, manipulation, extreme jealousy, controlling behaviors, and isolating them from other people. I know I'm flying through this kind of quick, but I just wanted to kind of lay some information down for you guys. And then, of course, gaslighting. I do use that term with our 7th and 8th grade students. It's kind of fun to pick that one out with them and see what they think could be gaslighting. And then, of course, we touch on consent with them. And this is obviously not an exhaustive list of what consent is, but whenever you hear the word consent, usually you think of the word yes, and only yes means consent. But we also like to say that consent is clear, informed, could be verbal and nonverbal depending on the situation. It's ongoing and retractable, freely given. Of course, there's a legal age of consent in North Carolina, which is 16. It's clear-minded, and we think about that whenever we do our bar trainings, which is part of our prevention programming. I'm actually doing a bar training tonight at Speckled Trout. I'm really excited. We mentioned that consent as clear-minded doesn't always mean that they're not drunk, or that they have had no alcohol, right? Because me having a beer is different than my partner having a beer. Our levels are going to be different there. So as long as somebody is clear-minded and they're able to consent, good job. It's obviously based on communication as well. Consent is not coerced, implied, forced. And it's also not only verbal and not only nonverbal, right? There's a lot of those the societal factors that we have to think about. It's obviously somebody can't consent if they're unconscious, or if they're obviously intoxicated, like I was just mentioning, comparing a beer of mine compared to a partner's beer. And then obviously somebody can't consent if there's power imbalances whenever we think about, work environments or age differences, things along those lines. Are you looking okay in the chat there, Denise? Okay. So this is something that we actually just touched on with our Hardin Park students today, what the difference is between flirting and sexual harassment. And it was interesting. Another class I was doing a couple of weeks ago kind of had trouble defining this. So we had to start off with what sexual harassment was, and then we had to work backwards. Well, if this is sexual harassment, then what is flirting? And so just kind of our blanket statement across the board is that the difference is going to be how a person feels whenever they're being flirted or sexually harassed, right? Or flirted with, excuse me. And if those boundaries are being respected, if laying those boundaries down and if those are being respected, then flirting feels good. And then obviously harassment feels bad and is unwanted. Kind of just moving forward here a little bit, some red flags. Those are what we call red flags, warning signs, right? So these could be warning signs that somebody is experiencing an unhealthy or unsafe relationship, or is perpetrating an unhealthy or unsafe relationship. So I have some examples here for you guys. Some red flags or warning signs of victimization could obviously be, being physically hurt is an obvious one that, maybe not obvious, but one that we could probably pick up on pretty quickly. When I'm thinking about working with youth, usually if they're becoming isolated from their friends or their support groups, if they're losing friends, that could be a warning sign or a red flag. If they're changing their behavior because of somebody's jealousy, if they are feeling embarrassed, put down, ashamed, guilty, manipulated, or controlled. This is one that I didn't think about a lot before I started doing this kind of work, but if somebody is afraid to express their own feelings of anger, right, because they don't want to set off the other person. If they obviously are nervous or sick in their stomach whenever the other person is upset or irritated, angry, and if they're not allowed to, or if they're afraid to make decisions for themselves, which is something I also didn't think about before doing this work. And if they feel like their dating partner or their friend, whoever their unsafe person is getting too personal or touches them in ways that they're not comfortable with. And a warning sign of perpetration, kind of going alongside the victimization list. If they are physically assaulting people, and that could be anything listed on the screen and things unlisted, of course. If they're intimidating other people, if they are upset, if people are spending time with other folks, and that could be friends, people of the same gender, anything along those lines. Other red flags or warning signs could include asking someone to change their behavior because of their own feelings of jealousy. And this is something I like to mention to my students. Feeling jealous is totally normal. And it's okay to feel jealous. And what really matters is kind of what you do with that jealousy, right? So if you just kind of talk with that person about your jealousy and what you're experiencing, you have a conversation about it, that's different than saying, hey, you can't hang out with these people anymore because I get upset about it and I know what they're thinking and you can't do that anymore. So that is where it can turn into an unhealthy and even abusive situation. Obviously, if they're verbally threatening people, oh, I forgot a quotation mark over here, if they are using guilt trips to get someone to do something. And if they are unable to control their own feelings of anger, this is something that always surprises me, especially with working with high school age students. Sometimes in doing the Safe Dates program at another agency that I worked for, we would talk about anger management. And some of the students would say, oh, I just can't control myself. I just get so angry that I black out. And I was like, oh my gosh, that is very concerning. You might need to talk to somebody about that, because we need to be able to control what we're feeling. And if we are that upset, we need to be able to walk away instead of blacking out and hurting people or doing something that we maybe can't take back. And then the last thing that we think, well, not the last, but the last thing on our list would be forcing people to do things that they're uncomfortable with. And that could be, really anything, physical, or it could even just be skipping school, cheating on a test, stealing something from the supermarket, anything along those lines, or lying to your parents, lying to people that you respect, things along those lines. Are we doing okay?
We are, Kelly. One person had said, would you be willing to share this with us for me to send it to people in the group?
The presentation?
Yes.
Absolutely.
Some of us that have teenagers would like to show it to our teens. And one thing at the bottom of the list, the perpetration, forcing people to do things that they're not comfortable with. I have a 17-year-old and a 21-year-old. And the first thing I thought of is using. Like a lot of times they'll be in a group where they're not comfortable and everybody's using, they don't feel like they can lead. And then that just kind of sets the stage for everything that comes after that. So I agree with you. Some of these things, I think we know kind of instinctively or intuitively, but it's much different to see it on a list where you can go over it with somebody and be like, this is a victimization sign. So it's a good list.
And when you're saying the word using, are you meaning like tobacco or drugs, alcohol, things along those lines? Okay, cool. All right. Thank you for saying that. I might keep that in the back of my mind in the future. Thank you. Oh, we're going to say something else?
No, just just if you'll share this with me, then I can share it with the people who are interested in having that. If you'd like a copy of this, put your email in the chat and we'll make sure that you get it. Thanks for that, Kelly.
Yeah, of course. So now we're really going to get into the meat of the active bystander intervention. So whenever we're talking to students about this, this is usually around lesson 4 or 5 with our students. So we kind of build a rapport with these students. So, of course, the first couple of times you meet a class, they're quiet, they're shy, they're behaving themselves. And then by the time you get to the 3rd and 4th session with them, they're really starting to show you who they are. And that's when we can kind of, not to use the word swoop in, but just kind of take advantage of the opportunity and say, okay, now that we know each other and we're comfortable with each other, let's talk about situations that might happen that are not okay or that you might be uncomfortable with. So we talk about active bystander intervention, and there used to be 4 Ds that we talk about, but I've added a 5th after listening to a couple of webinars last summer. So the first one is going to be direct action. It's kind of at the maybe 9 or 10 o'clock area on this circle. And that is where somebody is going to directly intervene into whatever the situation is. And they're going to ask that person to stop, or they're just going to kind of break up whatever the situation is. And they're going to immediately act and call out that negative behavior and maybe even explain why it's not okay. The next one is going to be delay, right? So that's that darker gray circle at the 12 o'clock area. And that says, wait for the situation to pass and then maybe check back in with that person, see if they're okay. We're going to be taking action later. And I do like to mention that it is never too late to act. Even if you can't directly intervene in a situation, if you can just check back in with them and say, hey, are you okay? Is there anything I can do for you? Something along those lines. Because it might not be safe to directly intervene in certain situations. The next little coral peach pinky circle says delegation, and that's where we're going to inform another person, maybe even somebody with more social power, more sway or more swing of what is happening. And maybe, we can just kind of delegate to them. Hopefully they'll take care of the situation and just kind of use their authority or their power to deal with what's happening. The next bubble is like a teal, aqua blue color. It says distraction. And this is where we might indirectly intervene. And we do use this active bystander intervention training in our bar training, which we're going to be doing tonight. And this is where, if I'm talking to a bar employee or staff, if they see something happening, they could walk in and say, hey, your card was declined. Can we figure out some other sort of method for payment? Or we could say, hey, I like that top. Did you get it at Anna Bananas? Don't I know you didn't? We have a class together. They can just kind of change the subject and just kind of slide in there and make it known that they are kind of observing what's happening without really putting themselves in danger, hopefully. And yes, it's useful whenever directly intervening might be harmful, either for the person who's intervening or for somebody who's involved in the situation already. And then our last bubble is like a purple color. It says document. And this was the last one that we included whenever whatever things were happening last summer, as far as the Black Lives Movement matter and the police brutality. This is something that came up a lot in webinars that I was listening to. So documentation is very important whenever something big is happening, right? That's where we see a lot of people pulling out their cell phones and recording what's happening. Whenever we're thinking of the bar trainings, we're thinking about, them kind of recording the incident in case they have to talk to police or report damages, things along those lines. So that's where we're just going to kind of suggest that you guys, write down or keep record of what happened in case you need to talk to somebody or report an incident. Are there any questions here before I get into some scenarios?
There were some comments I want to share with you.
Sure.
One of our local therapists, Susie Woodard, said, thinking about how many of my adult clients would have benefited from this presentation in 7th or 8th grade. So we're not trying to educate them 20, 40 years down the road.
Yeah.
And then somebody else said, I wish I had it. I didn't really learn it until my 30s. And what a huge difference it would have made for us all if we had known this. And it makes me think about, I read this after my children were no longer toddlers, about how we teach people to not have permission over their own bodies when they're young and they don't want to be kissed by an uncle or held by a stranger.
Yeah.
And we're like, no, you should let that happen and go anyway. And how it really changed how I viewed letting people have permission over their own bodies at a very young age. That's kind of something that's always stuck with me. So I like that all of these things, like I think we tend to think, oh, I've got to step in and be, kind of deflect what's happening. So I like all the options here that you don't necessarily have to put yourself in harm's way to help somebody that seems like they may be in a dangerous situation.
Right. And like I said, we just had this conversation with some Hardin Park students last week, and I mentioned I am a very outgoing person. I love to speak to people, and I love, just kind of meeting people. And so I'm a very direct action type of person. But there are some situations that I just don't feel comfortable getting involved in, something along the lines of, if somebody's standing in front of me at a grocery store and they're obviously in an uncomfortable argument, I don't know that I would step in and say anything because, of course, as the bystander, we're thinking, it's not my business. They're just having a conversation. So there are certain situations where I don't feel comfortable getting involved. And so we like to, obviously offer some other options for being an active bystander.
Yeah, that's helpful.
Mm-hmm.
You had mentioned doing it with Hardin Park. Someone asked if all the 7th graders in Watauga County get this presentation.
They do. With the school being virtual this year, we didn't have the opportunity to speak to all students. We did complete this 7-week training or the 7-week program with the Bethel students and with Hardin. Well, we're finishing up with Hardin Park right now, but typically it is offered to all schools. And I think we've been doing this program for 11 or maybe even 12 years with all of the 7th and 8th grade students in Watauga County.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, of course. I'm going to pull up just a couple of scenarios for us to kind of walk through. So whenever we're talking about these scenarios, I just want us to think about what the red flag is that we're seeing. What could we do, and what are maybe even some barriers for intervention? And you guys feel free to, if you want to unmute and just kind of talk back to me what you guys think you would do or what some barriers are. If you want to put them in the chat, that's fine too. But this is it's more fun for me, at least, if people, kind of banter with me a little bit. So this is scenario 1, and I've put the 5 Ds on the right side so we can be reminded of that. So you're hanging out with your friend group, okay? Recently, Alex and Taylor started off dating, and things have felt a little off. Taylor was telling a story about their game the other day, whatever game that was, and Alex tried to join in. Taylor said, Alex, you don't know anything about basketball, so you should just shut up. And Alex looked quite hurt and stopped talking, and they were just kind of quiet for the rest of the day. So if you had observed this, maybe let's try and identify the red flag. And maybe, if people want to put in the chat what they feel comfortable with doing on this list. Let's see, I can try and look at the chat maybe. I don't know if I can from here.
I'll read it to you as it comes in.
Okay.
So what's the red flag? If people can type in their answers.
Get some participation points in here.
Extra credit. Door prizes. We could do a door prize.
Hey, I have swag coming out of my ears if I need to offer that as an incentive.
So public disrespect, demeaning conversation, being embarrassed in public.
Okay. Yeah, those are definitely some red flags here. Definitely. Do we have anybody willing to share what they think they would do in this situation? Which active bystander intervention they would choose?
And people are still writing about the red flag and being insulting their friend, saying shut up is degrading and embarrassing. Okay, and so now what action would you choose?
Yeah.
Somebody said delay.
Okay.
Waiting for the situation to pass and taking action later.
Okay.
Somebody else said delegation, informing another person who maybe is older, have more social power. Somebody else said direct action. So saying something immediately about why it's not okay.
Nice.
Another delay, pull Alex off to the side later to check in, which I think to me is a perfect example of how important it is to have all these different choices, because everybody's personality kind of influences the choice that they might make.
Definitely. Yeah, and so I'd also like us to think, I'm sure people are still inserting, which tactic they would choose. But maybe could we brainstorm some ideas about what would be some barriers to intervening here? For people who chose delay or delegation, do we have a reason why we would choose that instead of direct action?
Yeah, I think so. I'd hate to embarrass people further publicly right there. And also, I don't want to be boxed out of having an influence on that friendship. If Taylor is my friend, I'm not wanting to intervene and have Alex say, well, you can no longer talk to Bill Adams anymore. But somebody who is a counselor or who knows them well can help them figure out the relationship that might be better. But delay is also a good tactic, going in and talking to them later.
Definitely. Thank you for sharing that.
And then
Hi, this is Amber.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, sorry, Danielle.
No, you're good.
Denise. This is my friend. This would be my friend group.
Yeah.
So depending on the dynamic that I've got with both Alex and Taylor individually, I would check in with Alex later, because I don't want to set up a reason for Taylor to isolate Alex.
Right.
And depending on my relationship with Taylor, I would probably go to them later and it's almost like a delayed direct reaction of like, hey, that was really not cool. What's the deal here? And if we're all friends, we should be treating each other with respect. I know that's a really simplistic way of
No, that's, whenever I think about this type of situation, I think, obviously I've developed a lot as I've become older. And I think if I were in high school and this had happened, or even in middle school, I think that I would have chosen delay or even maybe delegation. But being who I am today, I think I would have just immediately reacted and use direct action, like, whoa, hold on, like, don't talk to them that way. But that's just who I am. But I like, Amber, the way that you kind of mixed and matched direct action and delay. That way, you didn't kind of perpetuate the situation or embarrass anybody. I like that.
And Kelly, a couple other comments in the chat. One person said delay because similar to what Bill said, they wouldn't want Taylor to take it out on Alex later in private.
Right.
And then another person said if Alex was acting withdrawn, they may not feel safe having someone address it immediately in public
Right.
like that. And what you just said also reminded me of, I know in friend groups, usually one or two people have the power. And so it probably really depends on how much power you have in that situation. And if you're the person with the power, you may be able to address it right there immediately in front of everybody.
Right.
But if you're not in a power position, you may have to wait.
Yeah, definitely. See, yeah, there's so many like aspects going on here. I love that we, you know, have some different opinions here and just kind of, we're just kind of evaluating who we are and how we would kind of take this situation. Is it okay if I move forward to the next one?
Sure.
All right. So scenario 2, you've heard a rumor that some people in your grade have been sending risky pictures around through Snapchat of a girl in a grade that is below you. So you haven't seen the pictures, but you can tell that, you know, something weird is happening. So do we know which tactic? Well, okay. So what's our red flag here?
While we're waiting for people to chat, we had another comment that the presentation is great and it can be either reinforcing or even eye-opening, at least planting seeds, that the images and the words are clear, it's not lecturing or being judgmental, the choices are empowering. So thanks for that.
Thanks so much.
Okay, so people saying red flags are risky pictures being sent around of someone without their knowledge.
Definitely. So do we know which maybe tactic we would choose if we knew that this was happening? And I didn't give you a whole lot of context here, so you guys can kind of use your imagination.
So I've typed, what action would you choose? We're waiting for responses.
Okay.
So one person said, Amber said, age is a very important thing to consider.
Right.
Another person said risky pictures should be cause for further investigation, even if you think it's a rumor. Someone else said delegation because of the legal implications for minors. Another person said delegation to a school counselor or teacher.
Right. So I'm assuming, since we have the sentence here that says that the pictures of a girl in a grade below me. So I'm assuming that I am at least still in high school, if not younger. So we're assuming that these are photos of a minor.
Correct. Another one said delegation, probably would report to someone if the environment seems safe to do so.
Okay.
Somebody mentioned school counselor, teacher. I immediately went to an administrator in my mind, but
Okay.
I've had to deal with these things a lot.
Yeah. And so since we're thinking about which tactic we would use, you know, a lot of us are saying that we would kind of delegate to another person, which I think is a great way to handle this. You know, obviously we could directly intervene or directly act and say, you know, hey, I've heard that this is happening. If you have these photos, maybe you should delete them, because first of all, it's illegal to have those photos of yourself or anybody else under the age of 18. And this could be considered sexual harassment and bullying, and even cyberbullying if people are sharing these images, you know, through a technological source. So I think that delegation would be a good tactic to use here.
There's another chat comment about going directly to the girl whose photos are being shared to make sure she knew. And another one that said delegation needs to happen regardless of other reactions, which is interesting because you're saying you don't just have to pick one, that several things may need to happen.
Right. Yeah, definitely. So I could say, hey, don't share those photos. I could say, hey, homegirl, your photos are being shared. Just want you to know. Also, maybe we should tell Miss Presnell. Maybe we should tell, you know, the principal or, you know, the superintendent, whoever, you know, we have access to. And are there any barriers to intervention here in this scenario? Are there any reasons that someone would choose not to get involved here?
It's Amber again. I think here a lot of times, like my brain is firing on so many cylinders right now because it's just like we're talking about potentially illegal behavior, not just harmful and toxic.
Right.
And I think having our youth know the actual legal implications of this type of scenario is so important. And I see Lindsay
Definitely.
in the chat that legal action is hard and messy to navigate. And so it's like not a matter of automatically reporting, but knowing that this situation is a little bit over the heads of a lot of youth. I don't
Right.
know if that makes sense, but there are so many safety pieces to consider with this one.
Yeah, and almost, I mean, I think this might be kind of where you're going, Amber, but it can almost feel like an impossible thing to get involved in, especially if you're a youth, that this is happening around, you know, or if you're a youth that this is happening to. You know, it feels like there's no way to stop it. Maybe it's just kind of like a mudslide of just an impossible situation.
One person said making sure to connect the girl with support,
Great.
which is a great point. And then another person said, this is what Amber was referring to, that legal action with situations like this can be really messy and hard to navigate. Could risk anger or retaliation from peers that might get in trouble.
Yeah.
It also might depend on how well you know the girl. If you don't know her very well, it might be awkward to bring up. That it's, even if it's awkward, that as an adult, that's not the most important thing, but for an adolescent, that's a huge thing.
Right.
A barrier that I think of is that it's a rumor. So we haven't seen a picture.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. When I'm thinking in my youth brain, I'm like, you know, maybe I don't like this girl. Maybe she's hurt me. Maybe I don't know her. And I haven't seen the photos. You know, I've heard that other people have them, but I haven't seen them myself. So there's a lot of barriers for getting involved here.
This is a complicated one.
It is. It is. Anything else here before we do our last one?
No more comments in the chat.
Cool. All right. So scenario 3, you're at lunch with your best friend, Rebecca, and some of your other friends are, you know, come to sit with you. Rebecca gets weird and says that she needs to leave because she doesn't want her partner, Jordan, to get jealous and angry. So you see them later in what looks like an argument with Jordan, and Jordan looks angry and is really, really close to Rebecca. So if we're seeing this, either in our adult brain or our youth brain, kind of what do you think the red flag is here?
I'm watching the chat.
Okay. I can be patient.
Fear is a red flag.
Yeah.
We're waiting.
Yeah, I've seen a couple red flags here, but I know this information, so I'll just.
Seeing Jordan get angry is one. Not being able to associate with others. Leaving lunch. Seeing them close together and arguing. Changes in behavior. The fact that Rebecca can't be around other people without worrying her partner. The boundary violation of Jordan being too close. Physical intimidation. Those all came in.
Wonderful. You guys hit the nail on the head. So with that being our red flag, with all of those being our red flags, which tactic do you think you would choose here? Or would you mishmash them together and choose a couple?
Okay, waiting for chats to come in.
Okay, I will have more coffee as if I'm jittery enough.
That's one reason I don't drink caffeine, because this is me without caffeine, like saving the world from further anguish.
Here we go.
So one person said to be direct when it's happening. Another person said to delay and distract. Another person says direct action when it's happening. Direct action because Jordan might physically harm Rebecca. Oh, and that's interesting because you could do your direct action at lunch when she got weird and wants to leave, or you could do your direct action when later on you see them being too close together and that Jordan looks angry. So maybe if you do your direct action at lunch, maybe later on won't happen.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's multiple opportunities here for intervention. And I, even as direct as of a person as I am, I think if I saw them in this argument later, I think I might even do a distraction situation where, I maybe would walk up and be like, hey, do you have the homework for Spanish class? Are you hungry? Because I know you didn't get to eat lunch, like something along those lines.
One person wrote, depending on my connections with the parties, I would either use direct action or distraction in either part of this scenario.
Love that. Beautiful. And so as people are probably finishing up their tactics, what are obviously the barriers to intervention here?
Okay, waiting for replies to come in.
Right. I love that people are getting so involved. Thank you guys for chatting with me.
There must be a slight delay after I type in barriers, because then like 15 things will come in at once. So personal safety when intervening with Jordan, safety concerns. Those seem to be the two. One thing that I think of is this seems to be fairly far into the relationship of like being controlling. And so being careful about alienating Rebecca, because she does seem to be well into this being controlled by another person.
Sure.
Mary said unintentionally making things worse. Another barrier is what the strength of the relationship is with Rebecca.
Okay.
Risk to Rebecca's safety, risk to my own safety, someone said.
Definitely. Yeah, so a lot of it is involving safety, either of myself or of Rebecca, and then, whether or not we know her very well, things along those lines. But there's always, other tactics for intervention. It doesn't always have to be direct or distraction or even delay. You can always delegate. You can always delegate to somebody else. Is there anything else here before I move on?
The last one was I would delay because you could give up Rebecca the opportunity to become defensive of Jordan. That's a good one.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. Yeah.
Okay, I think we're good.
Okay. All right. Thank you guys for doing that with me. And just as we're finishing up here, I know that a lot of us, work in the community or have youths in our lives, or even just, people who are survivors. So whenever we're thinking about how to help a survivor in the event of a disclosure, if somebody comes to me and says, hey, I've experienced this, these are some things that we're going to suggest that you do. So the first thing that we're going to kind of encourage you to do is just kind of remain calm. Obviously, if they're expressing to you that they've experienced something unsafe, the last thing we want is to be frantic, right? So we want to be calm and just kind of reassuring. And obviously, we want to believe what they're telling us. We want to ask if they feel safe. Even as I'm answering phones for Oasis, one of the first things I ask them is, are you in a safe location right now? Where are you? Can you get to a place where you are safe? We're going to validate their feelings, especially if they're disclosing to us what's happening. If they're saying that something happened and I felt uncomfortable or I was harmed, we're going to say that's valid. You're completely valid in feeling the way that you're feeling. And you're feeling the way that you are for a reason. We're going to practice active listening. So while we're, I don't even have my phone right here. But while we're listening to them, we don't want to be watching TikToks. We don't want to be responding to an email. We want to be very present with them and just kind of actively listening to what they're saying. And then we want to just kind of say, thank you for trusting me with this information. And the last thing that we want to suggest is that you refer them to Oasis or another agency if necessary. Obviously, if there's a child involved, there might have to be some other parties involved. But these are the things that we're going to suggest that you do. And on the flip side, we're going to suggest that you don't do these things. We don't ever want to have expectations of what a survivor or their behavior should be like. So the way I like to explain it is a survivor is reacting normally to an abnormal situation. So whatever it is that they're expressing or just kind of outwardly showing you, just kind of take that at face value. We're going to try not to ask a lot of questions, right? If they want to share information with us, they will. And in the situation where they might have to talk to police officers, counselors, things along that line. We want to just kind of streamline that, and we don't want them to have to repeat their story over and over and further traumatizing them. And of course, if they want to share information with us, then they will. We don't want to poke and prod and be nosy and ask questions. We don't want to doubt the truth of their story, because if we kind of give them the thought that we don't believe them and that we don't trust them and what they're saying, then we are no longer a safe person for them to come to. And it might make them feel like they won't be believed if they tell anybody else. We want to try not to share cliche sayings, things along the lines of, oh, it'll all be okay, it'll all work out, everything happens for a reason. You know, while we may be uncomfortable and we're just trying to say the first thing that comes to our mind to be helpful, it can be discouraging and unhelpful for them to hear those types of things. And we don't want to make them report or disclose to other people. Obviously, it might be different if there's a child involved or, elder abuse, anything along those lines. But we don't want to make them report or disclose to others if they don't feel comfortable. And that's about all I've got for you guys.
That was a lot, Kellie. Thank you.
I know. I'm sorry. It was a lot of information.
No, so helpful. It just, like I said, even though I think sometimes we may know this instinctively or intuitively, sometimes we don't. And sometimes it's helpful to see it in writing. So thanks so much for all that.
Absolutely. I'll just display this while we wait for questions to come in. So you guys can have access to our phone numbers and my email address if you need it.
That's great. If anybody has any chat comments they'd like to put in there, I'll copy everything and send it to Kellie so she sees your comments. Any questions about this before we move on to maintaining wellness? Anybody have any question about something they saw in the presentation just now? A lot of thank yous. I'll send you all those comments.
Thank you guys for having me and interacting with me.
Amber said, sometimes thanking a person for trusting you with their story is powerful.
Absolutely.
So let's talk a little bit about, because you're talking some to kids about boundaries. So let's talk a little bit about how you maintain boundaries and promote wellness for yourself.
Sure. As far as a professional boundary goes, I obviously try not to check email after work. I try and leave everything I can here. It's a little difficult whenever I'm working from home because, I have my computer right there and the printer and all of that stuff. But I try and not work after my work hours, things along those lines. I try not to have work conversations after work. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, it does.
Okay.
I'm always interested in hearing what's hard about this for you. So I can only imagine looking to the faces of 27th graders, this would feel like a big responsibility to me. So do you get the sense that they're receptive to it? And can you just talk a little bit more about that process?
Sure. It's always really interesting working with 7th graders. Obviously we all were a 7th grader at one point. So I think back to, little Kellie, and it's interesting to see you can almost see the gears in their mind turning, even on a virtual setting. A lot of them have their cameras on and we're chatting with them. But whenever we're working with 9th graders, I love to hear things along the lines of, oh no, I got to have his password. I have to have access to all this. And, we kind of have to take a step back and say, okay, well, why are these behaviors problematic? If you can't trust somebody to the point where you need to have access to their cell phone, to their social media, things along those lines, let's talk about why that's a problem. And it really is. I just saw somebody mention it's a great opportunity to be able to talk to these students, because I'll agree with whoever, I'm not sure who mentioned it earlier, but if I had this conversation with somebody other than my parents about these types of things, I think that I could have avoided myself, some hurt and some situations for sure. But I'm really enjoy working with the 7th graders in Watauga County.
Somebody wrote that it's amazing that you're teaching our kids about these things when they're young. Also, some parents or caregivers may be unhealthy themselves and not know this or not teach this framework for healthy relationships. I know when I'm thinking about my own kids and the people that they've been friends with, it almost is like this, the more jealous I am, the more serious this relationship is, which has been an interesting thing for me to kind of observe as I'm watching my kids talk to their friends.
Yeah, yeah, and that's something that I mentioned earlier, I think. But you know, we tell these students it's okay to be jealous. It's a normal thing to feel and experience. What matters is what you do with that jealousy, where you put it, who you put that on. So yeah, it's interesting to navigate this with these students. And they're so advanced. I am always pleasantly surprised whenever I'm talking with students and they just kind of whip out some information that I didn't know when I was 12, 13, 14 years old. I love listening to them and their opinions.
Yeah. Well, back to what they said about not seeing it modeled at home, when we're talking about emotional regulation stuff in compassionate schools trainings, and just how many of the kids are like, my dad needs this, or my mom. And I have to imagine that when you're teaching this to seventh graders, they're thinking about what they see at home that maybe fits the criteria of victimization and perpetration in this presentation.
Definitely. And I did the same work at another agency before I came to Oasis. And one of the things that I was most proud of when I worked there was after, either before, during, or after we were talking to the students, we would offer a session for their parents to come and say, hey, this is what we're talking to your students about. This is how you can just kind of continue this conversation at home. And these are some things for you guys to know, in general. And you can either apply it to your relationships or relationships that you just kind of witness. So I really enjoyed the opportunity to be able to educate those parents as well. And, we'll work on that in the future here at Oasis. Hopefully that'll be coming pretty soon.
And so in thinking about this presentation, do you do this with anybody that requests it? And how Absolutely. Would they just email you to get in touch with you?
Sure. Yeah. We'll come and chat to anybody. I typically work with students and with bars and restaurants, things along those lines. If it's just a general kind of outreach situation, like talking to churches or anything along those lines, usually my supervisor, Sarah Crouch, you guys might know her. She's the outreach coordinator here at Oasis. Usually she takes those on. So you're welcome to email me and I can forward them to her, or you can reach out to her directly. But we will give this kind of talk, this presentation to anyone who's interested in
it. Okay, great. Do you know Sarah's email off the top of your head?
Yeah,
you can type it in the chat for people.
Absolutely.
Or you can tell it to me. Let me do it. Tell me.
You're fine. It's scrouch at oasisinc.org. Got it.
To request a presentation.
Definitely.
Got it. This is completely off topic, I guess. Is this what you've always done with Oasis? Has this been your role since you've come?
This is. I went to Abb for my undergrad and only graduated in 2018. And my junior year of college, an executive director at another agency called Families First. It's on like the southeast side of North Carolina. They do the same kind of work that Oasis does, is domestic violence and sexual violence. He reached out to me and said, hey, I have a job for you. And I was like, oh no, I haven't graduated yet. Can you wait? But it worked out to where I was able to get the position. So I worked there for about 1.5 years and then came here to Oasis whenever our lovely Jessica Dale moved on. So I've been here since December of 2019. And I've had a great experience, but this is the only job I've ever done at Oasis.
You answered the question about seventh graders in public schools. Do you go to Two Rivers and Mountain Pathways? Have you ever had that conversation? Just curious.
We've not. I'm open to it. We've not done that. We're currently working on kind of tapping into Avery County because we've only been serving Avery County for a handful of years, more than that. But we've not been there as long as we've been in Watauga County. So we're working pretty avidly on getting into Avery County. But I'm open to private schools or to the Montessori schools, anything along those lines.
They recently have been reaching out about some of the trauma stuff and compassionate school stuff. So sure. It'd be nice for everybody to arrive at the high school with the same information.
Yeah, definitely.
Any other questions or thoughts or comments for Kellie before we sign off? If you're welcome to put it in the chat, you're also welcome to unmute yourself and ask her something. And again, I'll copy everything in the chat and email it to her. If you do want this presentation sent to you, if you could put your email in the chat as well. Kellie, you've given us so much valuable information. Is there anything that you want to add before we go that I haven't thought to ask you about?
Oh, April is coming, right? So April's right around the corner, and that is what I know as SAM, which is Sexual Assault Awareness Month. We have a whole lot of events planned in Watauga and Avery counties. And so if you guys kind of want to keep up with that, I know that you can follow us through our newsletter. You can follow us through our social media. We do have a Facebook and Instagram account that we post on daily. And if you have any questions about getting involved, you can always email me, or if you wanted to join the task force that I kind of oversee. I know we've got a couple of task force members with us today, but if you guys need anything, let me know. And if I don't have the answer, I will find somebody who does.
We got a chat. Let me read this before we sign off. Okay. For those who are working, oh gosh, sorry, my little thing is not wanting to scroll with me. For people working with adults who might want to go deeper into the consent relationship responsibility thing, a great resource is the awesome.
Oh, yes.
Sorry, I'm having a hard time scrolling. Awesome Boundaries Workshop on the Sex Positive World. There's the website there. Other workshops offered that are specific about different types. My scroll thing will not work. This one is not about explicit sexuality so much as COVID and other issues like relationship consent. So that's not, you nodded, that's something that you've heard of?
Yes, definitely.
And
I will second
ahead.
that it is a great resource.
Okay, and I'll leave that there just for a second if anybody wants to copy that website and put it somewhere for yourself. So Kellie, thanks so much for being here. We're going to let everybody go so they have a chance to get a drink, go to the bathroom before their next meeting starts. Appreciate you making time for us. Thanks for what you do, educating our youth on healthy relationships. And it was great to have you with us. I hope you have a good rest of the day.
Great. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Kellie.